This is Mission Qualfon, a monthly podcast that takes you inside the workings of our company, but not just the ins and outs of business. We look at the ideas and insights that make Qualfon truly unique. As a company, we are committed to being the best and making each person's life better. Join us as we get to know and learn from people from across the organization. What's their story? What have they learned? And how do they live out Qualfon's mission? Welcome to Mission Qualfon. Hello and welcome back to Mission Qualfon. I'm Jeremy Lunnan and I'm here with my partner, Marisol Sanchez. Marisol, how are you today?
I am doing well. I'm getting to do one of my most favorite things, which is hang out with you and do a podcast.
Well, that's great. Thank you. It is a lot of fun. We were just chatting about this earlier, how we're actually getting paid to do something that we like to do so much. So that's a great thing. Now, I have to ask you this, because you and I really haven't talked much since the first podcast rolled out here a few weeks ago. So how's it been for you? Have you gotten good feedback? Have you heard from folks about the first episode? How has that been for you?
It's been great. It was great. The launch was great. I was a nervous wreck. I told you I had a little bit of a mini meltdown the day we launched. But aside from me, it was fantastic. The feedback's been wonderful. We had many employees all around the world, different departments contact us via email, some pinged us, social media, and everyone was pleasantly surprised by you and I doing this. So good. It's always interesting, and it's a podcast. It's not like we're on TV or anything, right? But not splitting the atom.
when you put something out there, it's always kind of scary, because sometimes in this day of social media, some people are very comfortable with just blasting you. So anytime you put something out there personal, something that it's kind of a reach to do that. So,
it's scary. It's a little scary putting yourself out there. And especially, I think, because we're doing it in a corporate environment. I think that's the hardest. Like, I could come on and do a podcast about anything. Like I said, keep it a secret. No one knew about it. But my corporate world plus my hobby that I kept in secret is now...
It's not secret anymore, right?
It's not a secret anymore. And so that was scary, but I'm so grateful for anyone who downloaded the episode. I'm grateful for anyone who took some time to let us know that they enjoyed it. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it. So
it's great. It's fun. We have a lot of fun doing it. It's been a crazy couple weeks for me also. Just so everyone knows, Marisol does all the work of the podcast. She does all the behind the scenes stuff. I've been spending the last few weeks, as you know, just in the last 3-week period, we have, with everything going on right now, we've been in the process of getting thousands of employees transitioned to working at home. And that has been
thousands upon thousands.
It's been crazy, but also really, really cool. And so I've been involved with putting together some training that will be rolling out to those folks that now find themselves working at home all of a sudden. So it's been a busy few weeks.
I have to stop and just tip my hat to everyone within the organization. Going through, this pandemic has just been, everyone's having a moment right now. And I'm just floored by how this organization has come together, and everyone from agent up to, it really makes me emotional to think of everyone's effort. And again, I'm sound like a parrot, but I'm just really, really grateful to everyone. The podcast, it really does not take a lot of time for us to do. It's, like we said, a fun thing to our work week. But what everyone in our organization really does is kind of amazing. But that also kind of leads into what our episode 2 podcast is all about. Because one of the things I found out when we launched is we had people listening that weren't within our organization, that weren't even within our industry. And so one of the compliments I got this nice message. They didn't really understand what our business was. And so I thought a good second episode, a good, baseline for our audience is to kind of delve in a little bit to what we actually do, because we talk so much about the mission. The intention of the podcast is about the mission, but I think to give some clarity of what our actual business is would be wonderful for our audience.
Yeah. I think so too.
Our guest this week is one of the managing directors of one of our divisions. So I'm going to admit something that might get me a little bit in trouble, but I really don't know everything we do. And I'm the executive assistant to the CEO. I see things on reports. I see the reports. I see the data. But if you're a remote worker like I am, and you haven't actually had the opportunity to visit sites, you see logos, but you might not actually know all the services we do. My background has almost exclusively been in call center, but I know that Qualfon does so much more. And I think that's a good segue to introduce our guest.
Ian Jones is with us. And Ian, Marisol kind of shared your title, but we're going to ask you, this is the quiz. We were talking about how we like long titles. So Ian, you have to tell us your title.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm so honored to be guest number 2 in the podcast series. Thank you so much for inviting me on to answer the quiz. So as you guys said, my name is Ian Jones, and I'm the Managing Director, Senior Vice President of Integrated Solutions. And probably with that little moniker of Integrated Solutions, it begs the question that is probably going to launch us into, the next 15 or 20 minutes of a discussion.
That's what we're hoping, because as you know, Marisol doesn't know what you do.
Yeah. So, heck, sometimes I don't know what I do.
I was going to say Ian's voice sounds really like he should be the next podcast host.
Absolutely. We're taking applications for my replacement right now, Ian. So,
yeah. As you guys talk about secrets, I have a secret hope that maybe this launches chapter 3, right? So
there you go.
Maybe when I'm done doing all of these things, I can turn into some sort of VO expert. So
there you go. Awesome.
Phase 2.
Yeah, exactly.
So Ian, can you break it down for us, like a little more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complicated topic, so it takes a little bit of time to kind of break it down into its parts and pieces. And that's one of the interesting things about this opportunity and this role, because really what we're trying to do with integrated services is take a lot of discrete lines of business that we handle for various clients and really bring together a fully integrated end-to-end solution. And so
can I interrupt? Because it's kind of hard to describe without actually giving name. We don't give the names of our clients, obviously, away on a podcast. But could you give like some examples of what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about a customer's journey in terms of how they interact with any brand that they're doing business with, we really could come into play at any point. We do a lot of different things, a pretty broad spectrum. We handle a lot of list development for identifying good prospects for a business. We do that through our data science team. So we'll look at people in terms of demographics, geographics, behavioral cues, and really identify the best prospects for a potential client. And then we also start to then work through the communication channels. We do about 1 billion pieces of direct mail annually out of 2 of our 3 facilities. So we have 3 operations, one on the East Coast in New Jersey, one in Highland Park here in the Midwest in Detroit. And also now we've just opened a new facility in North Las Vegas to service our West Coast business. The East Coast and Midwest operations both have robust on-demand printing capabilities. So we're able to do a lot of on-demand printing. It can be customizable, variable, small print runs, large print runs. And in addition to that, we do a lot of kitting. And by kitting, I mean, we'll actually do the package design and we can do the assembly for special orders. We stand up a lot of e-commerce sites for our clients. So places that are either business to business or business to consumer, where their end customer is coming online, facilitating an ordering process, and then we'll actually put that order together and ship that order to that customer for our clients. So we cover a really broad spectrum of what we call marketing services.
Has the pandemic, I'm trying to phrase this compassionately, but has the pandemic brought opportunities for your division to help businesses?
Yeah, it has in a couple of important ways. We've certainly been in touch, being here in Highland Park in Detroit. There's a lot in the news about some of the automotive manufacturing capabilities being redirected to try and, augment the PPE and ventilator supply that is so badly needed across the country. And we're actually trying to coordinate with some of those manufacturers to facilitate the storage and then the distribution of those much needed supplies. And also, it's been an important role for us to play where we're reaching out to customers to let them know that some of their brands that they work with are in fact open for business and are there to help them. A great case in point would be one of the auto manufacturers that we work with, who we help with recall notifications. And the one thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want people to not realize that they can come in and have their car serviced and their recall solved for just because of the pandemic situation. So we've been actively communicating with all of the owners in that portfolio, letting them know that their dealership is open from a service perspective and they can get their recalls fixed through the dealership. So those are just two examples of some of what we've been able to do to continue to support our clients during this situation.
I kind of have a feeling that I would be probably shocked to find out how many of the direct mail pieces I know I received. Our own company probably prints.
I know. I have the same reaction when the more and more I learn, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I just got that piece in the mail the other day. That's amazing. Yeah. And that is more of what we do from a communication channel and integration perspective, is we really do try and craft a communication strategy that makes sure that all of the customers we're trying to reach are seeing the information that they need to see, or that our clients want them to see, in the channels that they want to see that information. So we're able to handle direct mail, we handle email campaigns, we also handle Facebook and other social media targeted ad campaigns, and we can also do podcast work, case in point. And also we do some IAB, just traditional web advertising as well. So we really do cover the gamut. So when it comes to designing a strategic campaign concept for a client, we're able to integrate most all of the modern channels.
To me, it's very exciting, to say the least, to hear of all the ways we're able to service our clients.
Yeah, I really was intrigued by the opportunity when I was talking with Doug Kearney about the job, because having come from an agency background, a very traditional agency background, one of the things that I've realized in looking at that communication business from the BPO perspective is that you really bring a different expertise to the discussion. And when you can augment that with some of the traditional channel marketing that a client would expect from any given ad agency, when you can bring that to them as that discrete outsourced, marketing provider, I think it's a really interesting change of paradigm. And I think the clients are very ready for it. I think they're interested in finding more partners who can work on specific pieces of their business and provide more of a scope of services than just one or two channels. So I think it's a real differentiator for us. And I think it means a lot of upside as we start to come out of the crisis, the pandemic crisis, and we start to see the economy come back on. I think there's going to be a lot of need across the US market, certainly, for getting back in the game and reaching out to consumers and getting consumers back into their consumer behaviors, consuming things.
Are you in Highland Park, Ian?
Yes, I work out of the Highland Park office for the most part, current situation aside.
Yeah, I've never been there. Can you tell? Because I've heard about it, and I feel like as soon as I get a chance to visit there, I'm going to understand so much more about it, what you guys brought to the table.
Yeah.
But can you tell?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it? What it's like?
Yeah, Dialogue Direct, the Highland Park office is actually it's quite cool. It's a combination of a warehouse facility and an office environment that's kind of bolted onto the side of the warehouse. But what the organization has been able to do with that space is really a lot of fun. They have what they call Main Street, which is an open 2-story atrium that goes from the front to the back of the environment, where it kind of bridges over between the office and the warehouse facilities. And we've got this wonderful walkway that is, almost like a promenade, if you will. And we've got some fun, a phone booth, an old school phone booth. We've got an old school mailbox in there. And it just provides a great central artery, if you will, for everyone to kind of come and go. And you see a lot of your coworkers and team members
too, isn't it?
It's a giant environment. We've got a very, very big warehouse, actually 2 warehouses on the property.
I really want to go to Highland Park. I know we're not traveling right now.
Yeah.
But I feel that you've been, haven't you, Jeremy?
I have, yeah. And the Main Street is really cool. I mean, it's like a Main Street. I think of like, when you go to Disneyland and you have the Main Street USA, it's kind of in that vibe where it's like a little Main Street that you walk down. It's just very impressive. And it was surprising in a very good way when you walk into this big, what looks like just a big, huge manufacturing facility. And you've got this nice little atrium with this walkway that goes all the way through it. It was very nice. Now, I want to ask Ian this question. For folks that aren't aware of this, Highland Park it's right outside of Detroit.
Yep.
And you, I'm sure, can fill us in a little more, but this is an area that is not a target destination for companies, putting a facility in. And yet that's where Dialogue Direct chose to build. And now, Qualfon, since this partnership happened. And I think it's interesting. And I mentioned to Marisol earlier that throughout our history, when Qualfon has brought on other companies, really what they've looked for is that culture match. More than anything else, is they look for a leadership team and a philosophy at an organization that really aligns with our mission. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, as far as Dialogue Direct's decision to build where they did and to operate in Highland Park. What does that say about the commitment that Dialogue Direct had to the community there?
Yeah, it's fascinating because you're not wrong, Jeremy. Highland Park currently has certainly seen its better days, but it's actually very much on the rebound as well. Awesome. As much of Detroit is these days. Mm-hmm. But Highland Park has a really interesting history in the success and some of the legacy of Detroit. And one of the things about Highland Park that I have known for coming from the car business, which is really where I spent the majority of my career, working for the various Detroit automakers in one form or another. Highland Park was the original, not the original, but one of the most recent headquarters for Chrysler Corporation. So before they moved out to Auburn Hills, they had an operation in Highland Park. And so that was really one of the hubs of kind of the gravitational pull that made Highland Park a big, important part of the Detroit ecosystem back in those, 70s and 80s before they moved out to Auburn Hills. So with that in mind, you start to understand there's a really amazingly robust rail system right in and around Highland Park. It's placed right near I-75 and the intersection between I-75 and 94, which is your north-south, east-west interstate. So you've got, all of the needs that you have from a logistics perspective in terms of shipping goods and services here and there. And so as what was Budco is now Dialogue Direct and is now Qualfon, as they started to build out their business, you had the opportunity to have a very, very nice facility. You have a lot of room. There's a lot of footprint, if you will, for everything that we would need from an expansion perspective. You also, to your point about the alignment to the mission and how culturally fit together these two companies were when they came together, I think there is a very, very strong commitment on the part of the Highland Park operation to the community of Highland Park. It is a neighborhood in many respects. There are a lot of other businesses in and around the area, but it's all surrounded by people's homes and neighborhoods. And, we're one of the bigger business presence in Highland Park. We have a good relationship with the mayor of Highland Park and his office. And I think a lot of the community outreach that we've committed to over the years has been committed to the community in and around us, because we certainly have the opportunity to take advantage of all the great talent that is there, that is anxious to work hard and earn a living and provide for their families. And we're able to be a part of that for them, which I think is amazing.
Was this a part, and I'm making this up, so if I'm wrong, we'll edit it, but was this a part that got hit hard when the automotive industry?
Yes.
I'm trying to say, was it economically hit hard?
Yes.
Okay.
I think as much of the Metro Detroit area, you even today in its resurgence, you can still see the evidence of what has happened to the auto industry from the time of its domestic heyday when Detroit was really the epicenter of the industry to, what we have now. And Highland Park, as I mentioned, being tied so closely to the Chrysler headquarters, once Chrysler left, that really did have a pretty negative impact on the community. There was a big tax base, a big tax generator that departed. And that was a little bit of a pylon, if you will, for the Metro Detroit area, as businesses were migrating out to the suburbs and to, further afield for fresh land and new builds and a different community. And that's one of the things that I've always really been attracted to when it comes to finding opportunities professionally in Detroit. I always like to try and find the opportunities that are still vested in the city, that still contribute and give back to the city. I started my career at J. Walter Thompson, which was at the time down in the Rensen. So I've been working in the downtown area as much as possible, as often as possible. And that was one of the things that I was really intrigued by when I discovered Dialogue Direct and we were talking about, my coming on board and doing the job that I'm doing now. Okay.
I have one last question for you, and it's I might be putting you on the spot. And again, we can edit it.
She always says that. We never do.
I sense that. I sense that.
One of the reasons I'm fascinated about doing a podcast for Qualfon, and you and I kind of had this conversation a little bit prior when I was trying to convince you to do the podcast. But one of the things I'm fascinated about, one of the themes that I kind of want to delve into in this podcast is the idea of Qualfon and the mission, the differences in this company than in the corporate America I've experienced in my career. And because you kind of just joined in November, you're a baby.
Yeah, that's right.
What's that like for someone who has this extensive corporate background coming into a company? Like, when you hear about the mission, what was going on in your thoughts? If you don't mind sharing with us and the audience.
No, absolutely. It's probably a longer story than we have time for on the podcast, but I will tell you a short version of it. So to be
tell
honest
us the
with
long,
you,
we can edit out other stuff.
Well, it's interesting because I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and I was raised in the Anglican tradition. Okay, so Episcopalian, but went to church every Sunday. I was a Sunday school kid. My parents were very dedicated to the church and to the culture of a church-going community. And I had an interesting educational background because I came up through the public school system through primary school, but then I went into a couple of Catholic educational institutions until we left for Detroit. So I was educated by the Jesuits. I had my freshman year in high school was at Canisius High School. And I also studied, because it was something that was interesting to me, world religion. Mm-hmm. And I followed up some more world religion studies in the university. And so when you come out of that kind of family background and you come out of that kind of an educational background, I think that you really start to appreciate how any institutional commitment to a teaching of morals and values and humanity in its finest moments, celebrating those things, I think you are prepared, whether it's a Catholic tradition or a Jewish tradition or a Muslim tradition, any spiritual tradition. I think your mind is more open to those kinds of wisdoms that come from a place of grounding that kind of an upbringing gives you. And when I learned more about Qualfon and being a mission-driven company, it really felt to me like an authentic example of what a lot of companies are talking about these days in a trendy way, servant leadership, giving back to your community, and all of the things that PR departments, marketing departments, and oftentimes founders genuinely, are looking to make a positive impact and a positive difference in the world. But I think when you look at the story of how we became a mission-driven company, there is an authenticity to it, and there's a power to it that is it's very impactful. And where I really had an interesting moment was at the summit, when we had the beginning of the summit, and we had the opening, what I'll call the opening prayer. It was really much more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there was so much care taken to be so inclusive through that experience, where we had the Hindu tradition, we had the tradition of Islam there, we had the Hebrew tradition, we had the Anglican tradition, and we had the Catholic tradition, all represented in various ways, and putting on their morning devotion, if you will, was a really, really powerful experience for me. And I loved it just as a fan of world religions and spirituality, but also as a great representation of our commitment to inclusion, but staying true to, what is really a foundational belief on the part of our founding family and everyone who has joined this company and believes in the mission and believes in really what this podcast talks about, on a regular basis.
It was an interfaith prayer in the breakfast prayer morning. And I remember when the rabbi came up to give his prayer, he sang. And I didn't understand a word because I believe it was Hebrew. Tears came to my eyes because I felt the emotion that he was singing. And I just felt this commonality. The spirit of it was a beautiful moment. And I agree, that was a transformative moment for myself. And I've been here longer than you.
Right. I think everybody has.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope we weren't too rough on you.
Oh, not at all. I was, again, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to have this conversation with you, and would welcome the opportunity to come back and probably do a better job talking about all the things that we do in marketing services. But
honestly, you could probably launch your own podcast.
You did a great job. Great job.
You could do. There's so much that you do.
thanks again, guys. You made this really easy. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
See you, Ian.
Okay, take care.
Well, honestly, we could really start a whole new channel, Jeremy.
We could. And Ian would be a great guy to bring on board. Yeah.
There's so much that we do that I honestly, we need to figure out how to have more guests on to be able to share it.
And let me just jump in really quick and say we had originally scheduled to have Lyman Beatty in this episode, but to your point, Marisol, it made more sense for us to have this conversation just so we can kind of explain what we do.
My favorite part, as always, is when we circled back to the mission, because I thought he described his story so beautifully. And that makes me happy.
Me too. And what's really exciting when I think of all the interviews we've done, obviously these episodes haven't aired yet, but we've interviewed so many great people: Lyman Beatty, Abel Cruz, Al Baranachia, Kim Carr, so many great interviews coming up. There's a common thread among all of these, Marisol, and it's amazing. We heard it with Ian today, and there's this common thread that resonates throughout all of these conversations we have about the mission, and I think that means something.
Yeah, it does. I'm really happy with the interview and how it came out, and I'm really grateful for Ian for coming on board and doing this for us. So thank you to everyone who downloaded our podcast. Keep listening, and you can follow us on LinkedIn, Qualfon. And if you have any questions, look us up online at qualfon.com.
Thanks, Marisol. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Qualfon. Remember, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Mission Qualfon.